Do you ever get the feeling that you're stuck in a loop, that something in your life is fundamentally off, but you can't pinpoint it? As if, despite all your efforts to change, some invisible force keeps dragging you back into the same detrimental habits, the same self-defeating behaviors, the same cycles of disappointment. Maybe it's that internal critic that whispers doubt at the most crucial times, persuading you to quit just as you're on the verge of a breakthrough. Or perhaps it's a sudden, irrational spike of anger that erupts over minor issues, which, in hindsight, seem trivial. It could be that twinge of envy you vehemently deny, but which quietly corrodes you when you witness someone else's success in an area you secretly covet. Or maybe it's a paralyzing dread of failure that causes you to take refuge in excuses and chronic procrastination. What you may not grasp is that this is not coincidence. There is an unseen power operating in the recesses of your consciousness, molding your character, your impulses, and your decisions. A power you have spent your entire existence denying, but which has never ceased to operate. Carl Jung identified this as the shadow, the hidden repository of your psyche, where you have exiled everything you refuse to see in yourself. Your repressed ambitions, your vulnerabilities, your private shames, your darkest emotions, everything you were forced to hide to be deemed acceptable by the world. But herein lies the paradox. That which you disown commands you. The shadow does not simply vanish because you pretend it isn't there. On the contrary, the more you reject it, the larger and more potent it grows in the dark corners of your mind, awaiting the perfect moment to take control. It surfaces when you explode in a fit of rage for no discernible reason, when you push away the people who care about you and then lament your own loneliness, when you judge others with visceral hatred, failing to recognize that you are merely projecting onto them the very things you fear in yourself. It is the force at work when you sabotage your own goals, fail by design, and ultimately convince yourself you were never capable enough to truly try. Jung famously stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If you refuse to confront your shadow, it will continue to pull your strings from behind the curtain, while you convince yourself that your life is just a series of random events. But if you have the courage to look inward, if you are truly willing to face the parts of yourself you have always avoided, you can transform that shadow into your most powerful asset." That is precisely what we will explore in this video. Prepare yourself, because this undertaking is not a comfortable one. But if you genuinely wish to break the patterns of self-destruction and reclaim your life, this is the only path forward. Let's begin. From the day you were born, you were conditioned about what was proper and what was improper. From your earliest years, you were taught that some feelings were fine to display, while others must be concealed. You may not even recall the specific instances, but you absorbed the messages. Don't cry, don't be a coward, don't you dare get angry, be a good child, that's selfish, you must share. And so, piece by piece, entire segments of your true self were forced into repression. What became of your natural anger, your profound sadness, your instinct to assert your own needs? What happened to all those impulses that didn't align with the image of the correct person the world demanded you become? They were not erased. They were forcefully relegated to the depths of your unconscious, consolidating into what Carl Jung termed the shadow, the hidden domain of your personality that warehouses all the feelings, drives and instincts you disowned in order to be accepted by your tribe. The shadow is not some distant, academic idea. It is inside you right now, operating the levers behind the scenes of your consciousness. Every time you feel an intense, visceral dislike for someone who seems too confident, it might be your own repressed desire for self-expression, sending a signal. When you harshly condemn someone for seeking the spotlight, it could be your own buried need to be seen, suffocated under layers of false humility. When you feel a sharp sting of envy at another's success, it is often your own ambition, which you were taught to label as arrogance, crying out from the basement. And so, without ever realizing it, you navigate the world like an iceberg. The part that society sees is merely the visible tip. The vast, dominant mass of who you truly are remains submerged beneath the surface, unseen even by you. But ignoring the shadow does not render it inert. In fact, the more you deny it, the more destructively it manifests in your irrational phobias, in your compulsion to repeat the same self-defeating choices, in the simmering resentment you can't explain, and in the toxic patterns that replay like a never-ending loop. The real question isn't whether you possess a shadow. The question is, how much of your life is it controlling without your consent? But how exactly does this hidden aspect of your mind manipulate you and keep you ensnared in patterns that feel impossible to break? In the next section, we will dive into the subtle and insidious ways your shadow dictates your actions, right under your nose, and once you see this, you will never be able to unsee it. Have you ever questioned why the same negative scenarios seem to play out in your life? Why, even when you are determined to change, you seem to snap back to your old self? Why you feel surges of anger, jealousy, or dread that have no clear, logical trigger? All of this occurs because your shadow is not dormant, it is in command. And the most sinister part, it operates in complete stealth. The shadow doesn't launch a frontal assault, it doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't identify itself. Instead, it works through subtle subversion, quietly distorting your emotions, your decisions, and your reactions. It functions like a ghost in your own system, warping your perception of reality. You believe you are the one making conscious choices, but in truth, you are being steered by hidden compulsions that were buried decades ago. One of the most common ways the shadow asserts itself is through projection. Have you ever felt an overpowering, irrational hatred for someone? Have you ever found yourself criticizing another person with an intensity that, objectively, makes no sense? This is because we frequently see in others the exact traits we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. For example, a person who is conditioned to suppress their own drive might feel a seething contempt for anyone who openly pursues success. An individual who is terrified of their own aggressive impulses may despise people they see as pushy or direct. Instead of owning these qualities, they project them outward and attack. Another damaging mechanism of the shadow is self-sabotage. This happens when, on an unconscious level, you actively create barriers to your own progress. You procrastinate on vital tasks, you abandon projects. Just before the finish line, you repeatedly make poor life choices, all because a hidden part of you is convinced you are unworthy of success or is terrified of the consequences of changing. This explains why so many people seem to implode right when they are on the cusp of a major achievement. The shadow acts as an invisible tether, keeping you anchored to your comfort zone, even if that comfort zone is a place of misery. And it doesn't end there. The shadow also dictates your relationships. Have you ever observed how some people seem to be magnets for the exact same type of toxic partner, over and over? How they repeatedly end up in draining, destructive friendships? This occurs because, without realizing it, we project our unhealed wounds and unconsciously seek out situations that confirm our deepest held fears. If your shadow contains a core wound of rejection, you may find yourself perpetually drawn to people who will, inevitably, reject you. If you carry a shadow filled with deep insecurity, you may connect with individuals who ensure you are always kept off balance, doubting your own worth. And the most insidious part, the shadow can eventually hijack your entire identity. You convince yourself that this is just the way I am, that your specific set of reactions and feelings is innate, when in fact it has been sculpted by an accumulation of repressed experiences. You start to believe you're just unlucky, naturally anxious, or never good enough, when, in reality, you are simply living under the influence of this concealed aspect of yourself. But if the shadow has this much control, the obvious question is, how can we identify the signs that we are being dominated by it? How can we know if it is our conscious self in the driver's seat, or if it's this dark passenger? In the next segment, we will delve into the clear and undeniable indicators that your shadow is manipulating your life without your permission. And when you recognize these signs, it will be impossible to keep pretending it doesn't exist. If your life feels trapped in a rut of repetition, if you are chronically frustrated, anxious, or find yourself unable to alter certain behaviors, it is highly likely your shadow is in control, without your knowledge. But how can you be certain? How can you spot the signals that this hidden part of your psyche is steering your decisions and quietly sabotaging your existence? The first clear sign of shadow dominance is habitual projection. Have you ever noticed that certain types of people seem to irritate you beyond all reason? That specific traits in others provoke an emotional reaction in you that is completely out of proportion. This happens because the shadow forces you to see in others what you will not accept in yourself. Someone who has repressed their own desire for attention might feel an irrational contempt for people who are loud or expressive. A person who disowns their own aggression may be excessively bothered by those who are direct and assertive. The problem is, as long as you fail to recognize that this irritation is originating from within, you will continue to blame the external world for your own internal state. Another key indicator that the shadow is in charge is chronic self-sabotage. Have you ever been on the verge of finally achieving a goal, and then, suddenly, everything seems to fall apart, as if you were somehow orchestrating your own defeat? This occurs because the shadow is terrified of change. If at some point in your life you were programmed to believe that you are not worthy of success, love, or happiness, that repressed belief will continue to operate in your subconscious, finding subtle ways to ensure you never overstep those boundaries. This is precisely why so many people give up just as they are about to attain something significant. The third symptom of an uncontrolled shadow is the repetitive attraction to toxic relationships. If you consistently find yourself entangled with the same type of person, someone who devalues you, ignores you, or uses you, this is not a coincidence. Something inside you is seeking out this dynamic, even if you consciously despise it. If you were rejected in childhood, you may spend your adult life unconsciously seeking out partners who reinforce that core wound of rejection. If you were taught to suppress your anger, you might be drawn to people who constantly test your patience, simply because your shadow has found an indirect outlet for that buried energy. Furthermore, a powerful sign that the shadow is running your life is an irrational fear of judgment. Are you terrified of being criticized? Do you avoid exposing your true self at all costs, fearing you might look foolish? If so, your shadow is likely full of repressed shame. Perhaps at some point, you learned that making a mistake was catastrophic, or that being authentic was a one-way ticket to rejection. The result? A life lived in a defensive crouch, always trying to please, always attempting to avoid any possibility of being seen as wrong. This fear is not based in the present. It is a ghost from the past, an echo of everything you were forced to deny and bury within yourself. Finally, one of the cruelest signs of the shadow is a pervasive, inexplicable emptiness. Have you ever felt that something is profoundly missing from your life, even when, by all external metrics, things seem to be fine? As if there is a part of you that is never satiated, that always feels a fundamental absence. This happens because, over the years, you were forced to amputate parts of yourself to fit in. You disowned your true desires, your deepest ambitions, your authenticity. And now, without even knowing what it is, you feel the profound ache of that absence. But if these signs resonate with you, it does not mean your situation is hopeless. On the contrary, recognizing the shadow is the first step to reclaiming your life. The real danger is not having a shadow. We all do. The danger is in continuing to live in ignorance of it. But now we face the critical question: what happens if you continue to ignore your shadow? What happens when it becomes so repressed that it finally explodes in unpredictable and devastating ways? In the next segment, we will explore the true cost of living in denial and why ignoring your shadow may be the single biggest mistake of your life. The shadow you ignore does not go away. It simply gathers power. It festers, it strengthens, and it waits. The more you deny it, the more it will find alternative ways to manifest. And if you do not take conscious control, these manifestations can become catastrophic. You can spend years, even decades, pretending that certain emotions and impulses are not part of you, but there will come a point when the dam of repression breaks, and everything you have held down will surge to the surface. When that happens, you will be left to deal with the consequences. One of the greatest dangers of an ignored shadow is that it always finds a way to escape. If you repress your anger, it may detonate as an uncontrollable explosion at a completely inappropriate moment, destroying relationships and career opportunities. If you bury your deepest desires, they may emerge in self-destructive forms, through addictions, compulsions, or chronic excess. If you entomb your past traumas, they may manifest as crippling anxiety, panic attacks, or even physical symptoms that have no clear medical explanation. And make no mistake, the shadow does not limit its damage to your inner world. It actively shapes your external reality. If you fail to acknowledge your deep-seated fear of abandonment, you may end up desperately clinging to toxic relationships, preferring known misery to the perceived agony of being alone. If you deny your own ambition, you will likely sabotage yourself professionally, time and again, convincing yourself that success was never for you. If you hide your true passions, you will become lost in a sea of quiet frustration, unable to understand why your life feels so deeply unsatisfying. But the most profound danger of all is this: if you do not integrate your shadow, it can eventually stage a complete takeover of your personality. Have you ever met someone who seems to be entirely consumed by their own resentment? Someone who views everyone else as an adversary, who carries a palpable, simmering anger, who lives their life in a state of constant defense, always ready to attack. These people were not born this way. They have simply spent their entire lives disowning their own pain, until, one day, their shadow became so powerful that it seized control. The result is an endless, bitter cycle of fear and self-sabotage. And perhaps the worst outcome of all is depersonalization, the chilling phenomenon of feeling like a stranger in your own body, as if you were disconnected from who you truly are. This happens because, by repressing your shadow, you are also disowning fundamental parts of yourself. You attempt to be only the good side, surgically removing any trace of darkness, without realizing that you are cutting away essential pieces of your own psyche. Over time, this leads to a pervasive sense of emptiness, as if something vital is missing, but you cannot identify what it is. But then, the inevitable question arises: how do you escape this cycle? How do you stop being a puppet of your own shadow and start to integrate it consciously? In the next segment, you will discover the keys to transforming your shadow from a hidden enemy into a powerful ally, and thus finally take control of your own life. Now that you comprehend the danger of ignoring your shadow, the most crucial question of all arises: how do you bring it into the light? How do you stop being manipulated by these hidden aspects of your psyche and begin to use them to your advantage? Integrating the shadow does not mean destroying it or eliminating it. That is impossible. What Jung teaches us is that the shadow is not our enemy. On the contrary, it contains essential parts of who we are, dormant forces that can become our greatest power if we know how to access them. The problem has never been the shadow itself, but rather our denial of it. The first step to integrating it is to consciously recognize it. This means paying close attention to your emotional triggers. When something or someone provokes an exaggerated, disproportionate reaction in you, you must stop and ask, what does this response say about me? Instead of blaming the other person, turn your gaze inward. If someone irritates you because they are arrogant, is it possible they are just expressing a level of confidence that you yourself were forced to repress? If you feel contempt for those who seek success, is there not a part of you that also desires that, but has been suffocated by limiting beliefs? The second step is to allow yourself to feel what has been denied. If you have spent your entire life pretending you do not feel anger, it is time to look at that feeling without fear. This does not mean you should start exploding at people. It means sitting with yourself and admitting, yes, I feel anger. Yes, I feel envy. Yes, I am afraid. And acknowledging that this is okay. The shadow only dominates you when you try to pretend it doesn't exist. When you face it head-on, it loses the control it had over you. A powerful tool for this process is reflective writing. Take a notebook and start jotting down your deepest thoughts, completely uncensored. Ask yourself, what aspects of myself do I reject? What behaviors in others do I judge most harshly? What do I fear the most that others might discover about me? Writing about these issues can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. By naming your shadow, you bring it into the light of consciousness, and what is conscious can finally be managed. Another essential method is visualization and internal dialogue. Jung suggested that we should talk to our shadow as if it were a separate entity. It may sound strange, but it works. Close your eyes and imagine this repressed part of you. What does it look like? What does it want to tell you? Often, when we give voice to our shadow, we discover that it is not a monster, but rather a forgotten, wounded part of ourselves that just wants to be heard. But integrating the shadow is not an instantaneous process. It is a continuous journey that requires courage and radical honesty. The most important thing is to understand that your darkness does not have to be your enemy. Repressed anger can be transformed into focused drive. Fear can be turned into wisdom and prudence. Desire can become creativity. Everything that has been denied can be repurposed as fuel for your growth. Now that you know how to start integrating your shadow, the final question arises: why is this so rare? Why do so few people have the courage to look within? In the last segment, we will explore why most people choose denial and illusion, and how you can become an exception, someone who truly awakens to who they really are. At this juncture, you know that the shadow exists within you, whether you like it or not. You can continue to deny its existence, pretending that your fears, insecurities, and repressed impulses do not affect your life. Or, you can make the decision that few people ever have the courage to make, to look within and regain control of your own psyche. But before you move forward, there is something you must understand. Most people will never do this work. Most will continue repeating the same mistakes, living the same cycles of self-sabotage, and blaming the world for their problems. They will remain stuck in the past, feeding resentments, projecting their frustrations onto others, and convincing themselves that fate or society is responsible for their failure. They will never have the courage to face the truth about themselves. But you will. If you have made it this far, if you have followed every part of this journey, it means that something inside you knows that this change is necessary, that you are tired of being a prisoner of unconscious patterns, tired of feeling dominated by forces you do not understand. It means you are ready to take a step that few dare to take, to integrate your shadow and become who you truly are. But do not be fooled. This path is not easy. Seeing your shadow means giving up the comfortable illusion that you already know everything about yourself. It means confronting past pains, facing unpleasant truths, and admitting that much of what happens in your life is your own responsibility. This process can be uncomfortable, but it is also the only real way to liberation. The question now is, what are you going to do with this? Will you simply absorb this information and go on with your life as if nothing happened? Or will you actually put it into practice? If something in this video resonated with you, tell me in the comments. What part of your shadow do you now realize you have been ignoring? Have you noticed repetitive patterns in your life that can be explained by this? Share your experience, because talking about it is already a first step toward bringing it to consciousness. And more importantly, do not stop here. The next video will take you even deeper into another essential piece of this puzzle. If you really want to evolve, you cannot afford to ignore it. So keep watching, because this knowledge may be the missing key to transforming your life.